Welcome back to the Finding Your Freedom podcast, back after a bit of a break. Hope you had a good Christmas, good New Year, and everyone's back at their desks now, aren't they? And the emails are flooding in. As for me, I've been thinking about a couple of bits of research a lot recently. One's from Gallup, and it shows that having a best friend at work makes you 7 times more likely to be engaged in your job, and without one, your chances drop to just 1 in 12. Another bit that I read about is Google's Project Aristotle, which found that psychological safety, which is that feeling you can take risks without fear of judgment, is the single most important factor in team effectiveness. Well, in this episode, my guest Kasia learned this the hard way through her career, because every time she lost that sense of belonging and safety at work, that's when she knew it was time to move on. What makes her story valuable for high-achieving professionals is that she worked out what creates belonging during her years at Deloitte and telecoms, but then she lost it all when she reached senior director level in Switzerland. What followed was a clear picture of what burnout can look like for high performers, and spoiler alert, but it doesn't always match what you read about on LinkedIn. Work performance often stays actually quite high, but your body shuts down and it affects you in other ways. So for Kasia, when her neurologist gave her 2 weeks of medical leave, she ended up sleeping for an entire fortnight. She thought she was going to do lots of activities going outside, and she just pretty much only woke up to eat. And she'll talk more about that. She was born in post-communist Poland and inherited beliefs about being inferior to anything Western. She worked through university while her friends partied, commuted weekly to Amsterdam at 5 a.m. for 7 months. And yes, she also signed those waivers at every job limiting the company's liability for her working hours. Today, she coaches professionals on sustainable productivity, and she'll explain why the problem isn't finding time, but confronting why you need to be constantly needed, how to use a lifeline exercise to spot patterns in what's energized you, and why parenthood became her catalyst through modeling rather than guilt. We'll explore that compulsory drinks culture of professional services that creates an always-on treadmill, why one exceptional leader made a difference to her at EE, and Kasia's reframing that changed everything. Your calling isn't about what you do, it's about how you do it. Kasia, thanks very much for joining me today on the Finding Your Freedom podcast. Let's just dive straight in at the beginning. Tell us, the audience, about your career, your journey through from Thomson Reuters, Deloitte, through to EE Telecoms, and now coaching.
Well, Nat, thanks for having me here, and it's actually delighted to see you in a slightly different setting. What I will probably say is that I feel like I'm a cat that had already multiple different lives, and each part of my life was very distinct, but at the same time, very, very important. So I'm originally from Poland. I was born just before the transformation of moving from from communism to capitalist. And I've seen the whole change. Even though I didn't understand what was happening, I see how things were changing, but I also inherited a lot of beliefs, ways of thinking that people coming from the earlier age just installed on me. And one of them was this very big belief that we are inferior to anything that's Western. But at the same time, I saw how the country was quickly changing, adopting to absolutely everything. And the possibilities, every year, there were so many more possibilities. And I also was very lucky that I had a very driven family. My brother left Poland in the early 90s, and it just showed me that it's possible to change countries, to do something different, do things differently. And well, I followed his footsteps. When I was 19, I moved to England. I thought it would be just a short stint. And 12 years later, I finally managed to say, okay, goodbye, England. Let's move somewhere else. And this was, again, a very important transition for me, because I moved from a place where I felt like I'm coming from a good background, coming from relatively well-off family, and discovering I'm almost the only one who needs to work during studies. Everybody else can afford not to go. I was waking up Saturday morning to go to work, and I saw my friends coming from the party back. But it kind of also was this beautiful self-confidence moment. Like, I can do it. I can do it on my own. I can sustain myself, still with a lot of help, but I can do it. And that led me to go to consulting. The Thomson Reuters that you've mentioned was actually a stint in between, because when I was applying for Deloitte, they ran out of graduate spots for that year. And they said, actually, we would love to have you. And not in the role you applied for, in a different one. We think you will fit much better there. But it's in 12 months' time. And I said, amazing. I have basically a whole year where I can go back to my home country, be amongst my friends that I've missed dearly. I just needed something to do. And this one was, again, such a powerful self-confidence moment, because I had Spanish as a second language, as a one of the compulsory courses. And I applied for a role in, at that moment in time, quite prestigious place in my hometown as a Spanish market analyst. And I had to prove that my Spanish was up to scratch. And I definitely didn't feel that way. And I got it. So it felt amazing for about 5 minutes. And then I discovered that I do not, and I cannot work in a job that you do every day the same thing. And this was like, okay, I'm so glad that my next step is project work. I just loved the fact that you go in, there's a new surrounding, there is slightly new variation of the challenge that you get to experience just so much. And every day you are just, okay, this is what I know, this is what I'm learning. But then as the career progresses, and at that moment in time, when you get to the manager level, this is when the focus changes from being hands-on, being the delivery person of the project, to more, you are now leading the projects, but you have to start doing sales. And I did not like that at all. And I thought, actually, I like the whole idea of consulting. I love a lot of elements of it. But I also feel like when I'm talking to a decision maker that I'm missing certain experiences. And those were two things. One was leading the team. Yes, I was responsible for project team, but never for the full long-term development, which you do when you are working in a more normal setup and you have your team and you are responsible for them for the whole duration. And the other thing is, in consulting, you take clients on a journey, you recommend the solutions, but you are rarely there to really live through the consequences of what you proposed. And I was just very curious, how would my decision-making change if I knew I would be responsible for the decisions I'm actually recommending, making? So this is when things stars aligned, and one of my previous clients was looking for a head of transformation office. We talked, I got the job, and this was my first experience of being on the other side. That was also the end of huge transformation for BTEE. For anybody who is not from the UK, those are the main telecoms in the UK. And this was the year also when certain tax allowances were no longer applicable. So the second wave of integration of the two companies was possible. And in the end, I was there for just a short stint, I think around a year. And here again, a lot of things just happened. One, after Brexit, I didn't feel like I wanted to stay in the UK. It reminded me that UK was always supposed to be a temporary thing. And I was in a long-term relationship with somebody living in a different country. And we thought, we want to build life together, but somewhere else. And we decided that the best place for both of us would be Switzerland because we both love mountains. I love chocolate. And I'm sorry, Great Britain, but dairy milk, it's not the best chocolate.
Careful. But Cadbury's, surely.
Well, I prefer Lind. Thank you very much.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. Give you that one.
So I'm now in the land of mountains and chocolates. And again, it just happened that previous connection introduced me to somebody here, and I was able to move into a role with a lot of transformation, a lot of change. And I climbed the next level of career ladder to become the senior director of customer experience here. And from that moment, things started going downhill. Corona happened, burnout happened. My dad died. A week after his funeral, I got news that probably my mom has Alzheimer. It took another 2 years until the diagnosis got confirmed. It was a bit back and forth. And then I decided that I actually want to have family. Now I have 2 little boys at home. But that started being the one event after another where I just needed to rethink what I'm doing, how I'm doing, what do I want to do next. And I remember that going backwards to when I was 18, I wanted to study either geography, specifically geology, or psychology. And both of them didn't feel like great career moves. So I decided business management, I can do that. And I started tracing back, what is it that I enjoyed in every single part of my journey? And how can I bring it together? And this is how I discovered coaching. And it was absolutely everything that I liked and I'm good at. It's seeing the patterns, it's seeing the big picture and the story within. It's going underneath. It's really being with a person through the whole transformation and change and seeing how things develop for them. But at the same time, it's not about me. But you probably will agree that every conversation you have with somebody, there's something that steers something in you and you feel like I'm learning here as well. It's also allowing me the flexibility that I didn't have in the corporate world. So yeah, this is my latest cat life of being the coach, trainer, and mentor. And at the moment, I'm just really loving it.
Fantastic. Thanks for the run through. Really, really great to hear your story. Obviously, some difficult challenges in there that I wasn't even aware of, and I guess that's part of life's rich tapestry. Can I take you back to your time in Deloitte and management consulting, which is, as I understand it, a pretty high pressure environment, high performance environment. What was that experience like for you? And what did you learn about yourself during that time? We want the good, bad, and the ugly.
In hindsight, I actually think that, especially for those more junior roles, from analyst to manager, it wasn't as high pressure as telecoms afterwards because there was natural seasonality into what we were doing. So you have a project, and even though I wasn't in the most technology part of the consulting, I was still where we were implementing new technology. So there was a natural rhythm. You have high pressure parts of the timescales. You have some dips where you can recover. And again, there's more all in around the testing and go time. And that allowed me to have a bit more rhythm of it. But in consulting, what you do on the client side, it's only one part of what you are supposed to be doing. And I remember laughing at my flatmates at that moment in time that, sorry, I can't be home tonight for dinner because I have yet another compulsory drinks. And it just felt like every week, and if I wanted to, every day, there would be some kind of event, industry event, client event, practice event, grade event, somebody else event, that you just could go from one place to another. And networking was important. Talking about yourself was important. And similarly, the things that you are doing for the company were important. So for anybody who is prone to not good enough, not fast enough, not enough, this is just a perfect ground for continue to going, go, go, go. I can always find something else to do. I can always do more. I can always do it better. I can always improve. And that is what's both very energizing, but at the same time, it could be a trap if you don't know how to manage it, or you don't know how to recover when you are not in those peak times.
Yeah, going to
Um,
events and talking about yourself sounds like heaven to me. So I think maybe I would have enjoyed management consulting, but what was what was it like, and what was the purpose of all these events?
so part of it was to integrate you with the company. And actually, funnily enough, I'm wearing a green t-shirt, and one of the nicknames for Deloitte is a green dot. So I think I'm still,
You're on
Deloitte
and
in my heart. I cannot shake it off. So yeah, part of it is you feel welcome. You are part of something bigger on different levels. So you're part of this community, part of this community. Part of it is knowledge sharing. Part of it is getting to know where the next exciting project is and how can you get yourself into the next project of your choosing rather than being assigned somewhere. I was spending so much time with people from the team, and I really enjoyed being with them as well. So yeah, it's probably similar to what some of the big tech companies were doing by creating campuses that had everything. So you never really had to leave. So yeah, that was becoming what you were breathing, what you were living every single day.
and so what at its heart, what was it like being a management consultant? If you for other people maybe who haven't done that role, how would you describe it to them?
I think there were two experiences I had. So when I joined the team that came from a smaller consultancy that was just swallowed by Deloitte. And at that moment in time, I think 3/4 of the people in my unit were coming from that small consultancy. And the drive there was very much, let's do the best thing for the client. Let's do things right. And it's all about, if you do the right thing, if you build your reputation, the client will want to give you the next piece of work and it will be easier to sell something else. And then a couple of years later, I've noticed that there's a whole different world where it's all about sales, and how you deliver becomes, in a way, secondary for a lot of the people at the top. Not everybody, but quite a few of them are just so, okay, I need to reach this target of sales. So all I'm going to do is just exploit you to the maximum so I can sell you again. I will exploit your relationships. I will exploit anything you have. And I will put much more focus on the proposal than it is on the deliverable, on the already sold project. And this mentality was very tough for me because I like the creation process.
That's part of the
There's
delivery, is it?
Yes. There's also massive amount of uncertainty. The projects I was on, they were usually at least half a year. So for half a year, I knew, okay, I'm living here. My new office is here. I'm doing this commute. But I could have been absolutely anywhere. So most of my clients were central London, which suited me perfectly. But I also had one client that was in the middle of nowhere, and you spend a lot of time commuting to small place where there is basically two pubs, one Sainsbury's, and that's your life. I had 7 months where I was commuting every week to Amsterdam, which sounds glamorous. And it had a lot of advantages, but it was also massively tiring because 5 a.m. taxi waiting on Monday morning, Thursday coming in quite late at home, weekend. Actually, I remember that I was living at my friend's because I decided not to even bother to rent a flat anymore because what's the point? I'm never there. And you never know. And you cannot really say no unless you have really, really good excuse. And you very rarely have a really good excuse. So you can be posted absolutely anywhere, and that's your life.
There's a kind of slight, I mean, there's pros and cons to all of this as ever in life, but a lack of choosing your own direction and, just being sent sort of anywhere at a drop of a hat. And that leads me, I guess, and probably part of I'd imagine part of the reason for the move, but tell us a bit about your move into telecoms, then into EE. What prompted the transition?
So I think that fairly early on, I thought I want to go all the way to a manager and then I will rethink. So that was when the switch was happening from you are doing the job versus you are more on the selling side. And yeah, I think this is also when I started having more projects that were with different set of individuals. I came from this very kind of family, neat, tight-knit group of people where I just enjoyed being with them at work and outside of work, to individuals where I felt like I'm not really sharing that much in common. And I will go back to my beginning. There was also a lot of inferiority complexes that I inherited coming from Poland, and also being a woman and looking quite young. I started feeling like I want a slightly different experience for myself, and that's where I made the switch to what we call the industry, so normal stable company. But there was
Interesting what
also
you say there. Sorry to interrupt you, but just picking up on that point, it's interesting what you're saying about that sort of sense of belonging and sense of team. I was actually doing some reading this morning on a Google study from a couple of years ago where they were talking about that being the number one thing is like, do you feel like you believe that you're part of a team, basically? And another Gallup study that was showing that if you have just one other person that you kind of are friendly with or friends with at work, the chances of you enjoying your job and staying are astronomically higher than if you don't have that.
I think that if I look at every single step in my career, the times that I decided it's time for me to go, it's when I lost this sense of belonging.
Okay, so and then I interrupted you there. You were saying and you moved on to EE.
Yes. So I moved for a very specific person. I knew that it's unlikely that they will stay in the company for a very long time because they didn't get the job they were after. As I said, it was high transition moment for the company itself. But I'm not regretting it. She was probably the most influential leader I ever had. Sadly, she passed away a couple of years ago. But I had some good bosses as well, but she was exceptional.
Something that comes up so often in these conversations is just having that mentor, you could call it, or some people don't identify as a mentor. You could call it whatever you like, but just someone who's a kind of someone who you get along with, who looks out for you and cares about your progression.
Absolutely. And I think one of the elements that I just cherished the most about how she was leading the team was she was really trying to build the team. And if I remember each individual as her direct report, we were all vastly different individuals, but we all really respected each other. So even when we were disagreeing, and sometimes there were some harsh words being said, it didn't feel personal because you could feel that there is just respect for what we are doing. It's just different perspective, different KPIs, different angles that we had to look at certain stuff. But at the end of the day, we were just a really good team.
Yeah. Because perception is reality, isn't it? And if you have a good rapport with someone, like you said, it's when they're talking about, when you're disagreeing, it's not perceived as a personal thing. Where in other situations, if you don't get along, it's perceived as a personal thing. So that's just how powerful that can be. We, just moving on slightly, we talked about the B word, burnout, in other conversations we've had. And I know you've lots of thoughts on that. So tell us about your own personal experience, whether you even identify with that word or not.
Absolutely not. It took me a very long time to even acknowledge that this could be me. Part of the reason was that I didn't really know much about it, but the only examples I knew of or I read about just didn't feel like me. It felt like it's somebody who stopped performing at work, started getting more feedback, negative feedback, and it was just spiral down where negative feedback led to even less enjoyment of work and therefore worse results. So even more negative communication coming in, and you just go down, 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 down until you
You thought
are.
burnout was like, failure basically, or you're kind of failing rather than anything else.
I thought that this was the primary cause where you just can't get yourself out of the hole of where everything just feels pointless and just wrong. I think I was also acknowledging that it could happen if you have bullying at work, mobbing, micromanager. But none of that was, well, bullying, yes, was really true for me at that moment in time. And I think most of the time I just felt like, but I've done so much more back on that project. I've done higher complexity than that. So what's happening? And I didn't realize that something was wrong until I started having very physical symptoms. So it started with headaches, with insomnia. At first, there was some vitamin deficiency that could have explained both, but that wasn't it. I was talking with neurologist. We checked everything that possibly could be checked. Nothing there. And I remember it was April. I was just so tired. I was just tired. And I was just sitting in her office and saying, you know what, I just want to sleep. And she said, you know what, I'm going to give you a week off, 2 weeks off. And I thought, amazing. I don't think in my whole career I ever had more than 3 days off sick. So I will be able to go for that walk in the forest or on my mountain bike and just recover. And I spent the whole 2 weeks sleeping. I was waking up, eating, and going back to sleep. And when I tried to go back to work, in Switzerland, you have something that allows you to go back 50% of the workload and then 60. So you are eased into it. And I remember that day one, me being back at that moment in time for 3 weeks, my team had this weekly, very important meeting at 10 a.m. Clearly, I'm prepared. Next meeting at 11, and my boss is saying, Kasia, have you already done that? Have you familiarized yourself with that? I've been back for 2 hours. How? And I realized that in that environment, I will never fully recover. There were a couple of other things that happened, and I decided I need something else. I need to be able to recover physically because I was worried that I will be better and I will spiral down to again being this super exhausted person, which I didn't enjoy because I like to have energy for my mountain bike or skis or hikes or whatnot. But before I even acknowledged that it was burnout, I still kept searching for other sources. And then my first experiences with mental health professionals were really, really bad. I'm in a German speaking country, and I made sure that, hey, I'm ready to meet with a psychologist. But I specifically asked, do they do therapy in English? Because no way, I'm talking about myself and very emotional challenges that I went through in a language that I barely can just convey the meaning. And I remember that I finally got the appointment 2 months later, and she was like, "No, I don't speak English." Like, but even your own receptionist said that you do it. That's a mistake. Like, okay. I went then through the GP to another one, and within 5 minutes, without asking a single question, she said, "You have depression." It's like, how can you know? You didn't ask me anything. And her English wasn't the best, so I wasn't sure she understood me. But I got to know a little bit more what I need. So I went to psychiatrist because I needed a doctor's note that would allow me to be off work for a bit longer. And she said, long COVID. I said, you also didn't ask me many questions. Why are people just jumping into the diagnosis without actually speaking to me? And I think it was just a bit later when I started talking about it a bit more and starting realizing there's so many more individuals that went through similar thing, and it actually could be burnout. And then I talked with some other mental health professionals that didn't diagnose me immediately and said, yes, that's what you're describing, looks like burnout. And took very, very long time until I finally said, yes, that was it.
Yeah. So it's amazing how kind of common I think it actually is out there, especially within professional services, to having a very similar story myself and not recognizing it. And it was actually only about a year and a half after going to step back from full time work that I think I just saw something on, I don't know, LinkedIn or something on the internet. And then there was a kind of tick box of like, energy depletion and exhaustion, the physical symptoms that you mentioned, some of I mean, typically, I think the definition includes some kind of cynical outlook as well, which I don't think maybe other people would differ, but I didn't relate to that one. But certainly, I relate heavily to your story about going to doctors. And I think that's very prevalent within our society is just to look for what's the answer when it's staring you right in the face, but so difficult to do anything about. If you go to the doctor and say, I've got all these symptoms, and they probably, a lot of them know it's your lifestyle. And, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to know that if you're getting up at 5 o'clock on a Monday, you've got a million and one things, you're not getting exercise, you're not eating properly, probably stressful meetings all the time, like that's going to be the root cause of the problem. But we sort of, to face up to that is so difficult. So there's this kind of cognitive dissonance. It's like we don't want to hear it. So then I think what I see a lot of is people then talk about what I would call as sticking plasters. And maybe that's unfair to them, but it's the things like, Wim Hof breathing, meditation, yoga, all of these things. And I love all of those things, to be honest with you. And I've tried them all, especially when I was kind of going through it. But they make you feel a little bit better, but it's completely around the edges. So yeah, identify with a lot of what you're saying there, and I think a lot of people who are out there, I think the biggest message is probably, almost like admit to yourself that probably is the stress of your job. Doesn't mean you have to leave your job. That I think that's part of the cognitive dissonance. Perhaps I'm interested to hear your thoughts on that bit.
So I think there were a couple of things that came to my mind as you were talking. One of them is my love and hate relationship with LinkedIn or any other social media where you have bite-sized information that is just put into infographic. And a lot of the time it's just done by somebody who saw it on another account, just repurposed it, stick whatever niche they have without understanding the slight differences. So if we talk about high achievers, the burnout will look slightly different than for, I would say, more standard population. It's much more deceptive and it takes much longer to recover from, because high achievers are just so used to pushing through, so used to seeing, if I achieve that, I will get reward. If I achieve that, I will rest. If I something else. And it's just a matter of doing. And because the achievement is so important, they don't drop the standard at work, or very minimally. And most of the popular information on social media is, oh, you see the drop of performance. And this is the signal for the leader, manager, whoever. Not for high achiever. For high achiever, you probably won't notice that. You probably will notice it much more in terms of what happens outside of work. Do they continue having social interactions, or are they withdrawing? What are they eating? Is there a push more towards ultra-processed foods that are giving the dopamine hit, the quick relief, rather than more nutrient-based, dense food that probably they were eating before? How about recovery during the weekend? Is it just binging Netflix, or is it something active, what they used to do? So I just caveat here, because I think it's important to throw in the mix, considering your audience, that what you see every day on social media or a quick AI search might not be the reflection of your experience. So that's the deceptive part. And because high achievers tend to push themselves onto the moment where they break. I know quite a few people that had heart attack-like episodes. They were rushed to A&E only to, no, you don't have a heart attack. It's all stress related, or could be panic attack. But it just expressed itself the same way. But it was the body just saying, no, that's too much. That's for way too long. Or people with depression episodes so severe that they needed to be hospitalized. Again, it's just pushing yourself so far that the whole system crashes. And then it's much longer recovery time, which could even be years.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you mentioned there about physical symptoms, and there's a book, isn't there, about the body keeps the score, about the sort of the mind-body connection, and how, yeah, you're getting all these drugs basically flowing into your body through, and then that, I agree, the way high achievers interact with their work, it causes the dopamine and then the stress, cortisol, like we have it's basically an addiction to the drugs. I mean, what I noticed particularly was my attention span. I think it's still pretty bad, but my attention span got horrendous. I started my career being able to write. I mean, one particular task I remember as a trainee solicitor, I wrote the governance protocols for a new university that was getting conglomerated in Glasgow. And it took me 5 days sitting in a room, just going through documents and deep work. And by the time sort of 15 years later, I had a team and I was managing everyone else, I was struggling to read an email. Like, I'm being serious. I was struggling to finish an email. If it was a long email, I'd start skipping lines because my brain was telling me what's next, what's next, what's next. There must be another email out. There must be something else. There must be another fire I need to put out. This email's taking too long. So it was a shocking decline in my attention span, and that all has a knock-on effect.
And let me guess, when you were in the junior position, the technology was different. So maybe you had, I don't know, 10 emails per day and you had to physically have your laptop on connected to Wi-Fi source. And those couple of
Exactly, yeah.
years later, when your attention span was non-existent, you
Also, I was
had...
not important. You're totally right with the technology. I mean, notwithstanding the fact I wasn't important enough to be getting emails, I mean, that was a beautiful thing. When I was a trainee, I was just left to get on with the task. But I mean, there's a serious point there, which is once you get to become a leader and you're a manager, then, you just got so many demands on your time that then lead to a totally different feeling within your job. So let's move this in a slightly different direction then. We've talked about kind of burnout. What about becoming a parent? You've got 2 boys now. I'm just wondering, I'm not a parent. I don't know anything about this stuff apart from what I see in the soft play occasionally with friends. But how has being a parent changed your life in relation to some of these themes and areas that we've been talking about today?
It was a catalyst. It's one of the hardest things that I've done and probably one of the most rewarding. And you probably hear it a lot from any parent. And I know it sounds cliche, but it truly feels that way. But it was a catalyst because when it was just me, I felt like, okay, I can take a hit. I can do more. But then I felt like whatever I'm doing, I'm modeling for somebody else whose life is ahead of me, ahead of them. And I feel deeply responsible for what I could provide for them. And this is actually when I started the whole journey of asking for real help, and acknowledging the fact that I might not be able to do everything on my own. Surprisingly going much further than I ever did on my own, which makes me now a huge believer in how powerful coaching is, even if your life seems in order. In fact, next week I'm starting a relationship with a different coach and mentor, so I have some support going to the next level of my career. But going back to the kids, they are also a massive reminder of what you are prioritizing in life. And I remember with my first one, when he was a newborn and I was stuck at home, he was already a little bit regulated. And I was just constantly thinking, how much am I missing? If only I was at work now, I could be doing this. If only, and my mind was still racing. And I remember meeting with my friends who have 2 disabled daughters. At that moment, I'm only one. And they were just so present, so much having fun. And I was just, why am I not like that? I want that. And it started also making me realize, why am I rushing? What am I missing out on? And what I'm missing out on is actually everyday enjoyment. And the more I started rephrasing what I'm doing and how I'm doing, the more I'm actually realizing I have bigger ambitions than I had before, but I feel so much calmer. It feels so much more aligned. And again, one of the reasons why I decided to leave the corporate world was I wanted the flexibility that it didn't allow me. Every single work I ever had, apart from the very first one, I needed to sign the waiver on the amount of hours I was working. And it wasn't really a problem. It was just me, right? But I just absolutely love the hour of when I'm picking up my toddler from childcare, and we're picking him up pretty much as early as possible. And we take our time to come back. If the weather is nice, we're on the playground for an hour. And then we slowly go back home, eat something. Usually it's something that it's already prepared because come 6 o'clock, he is hungry and he wants to eat right now. And then we have time to read the books in the evening. And it's again a very lovely time if you can stay in present. But if you are in your, what's the next email? What's the next thing? What's the next thing? This will be a torture.
So how do you, or I don't know if it's a fair question, but I guess you've taken a step back from corporate life and taken a new direction. But what do people do if they're in that corporate environment and they've got kids to help them stay present? I think, I mean, coming back to the burnout thing as well, like that, you're kind of, certainly my experience was your brain goes into a certain mode where, yeah, you're checking the next email, checking the next thing, checking the next thing. So, and that detracts from that feeling of presence, which I can definitely see if you're a parent would feel, I don't know what the word would be, quite distressing almost if you're sort of thinking you're trying to enjoy the time with your kid, but you can't because you're thinking about work. That can't be a good feeling.
I'm going to do some selfish self-promotion here. I'm working on launching a couple of week program exactly for this problem. And that is how to take 10 hours a week back in order to find the space for whatever is your dream at that moment in time, whether it's spending more time with your family, whether it's launching a business, whether it's running a marathon or reading more books, doesn't really matter. And the finding time is actually the easiest part out of the whole thing. The hardest element is to let go of why you're doing this race of constantly being on. The thing is, it feels so good to be constantly needed. It feels so good to be the expert in the room. It feels good to be coming in and hey, can you make this decision? Can you direct that? Can you do that? It feels good. It feels very rewarding. But if you go down and see why am I doing it? Usually there is some kind of mechanism, whether it's people pleasing or fear of failure or something else. There's something that it's driving this need to be on. And then there is the second part, which is, okay, let's face what are your current priorities and have a very simple decision-making tree, because a lot of high achievers, if you tell them, hey, you have 10 hours per week, what do you want to do? Oh, I want to climb Everest. I want to read 12 books in a week. I want to run a marathon. I want to be the leader of charity. And you have something like 20 different, learn the instrument, a second language. Basically, there is so much
And that's
that,
part of being the high achiever, isn't it? Like it goes hand in hand because you're like, well, part of being a high achiever is you feel that you want to achieve. I mean, it's kind of obvious that, but then actually the problem is you just don't have enough, well, I was going to say enough time, but as you've said, it's not about time, it's about priorities, isn't it? And deciding what you really want to do.
yeah. And once you have it clear, okay, I'm saying that in my case, family is first. What are my non-negotiables? My non-negotiables are, I want to eat breakfast and I want to have this evening time. If I was now in the corporate world, I would just make sure, okay, guys, I'm available from this time to this time. But also, once you know your priorities and once you know why you are doing certain things, it's so much easier to say no and say, actually, this is not within the scope of my role. Where previously you would say, yes, of course I will help you. I'll take more responsibility. This time you would say, maybe not. One of my bosses was really good, which was really good for her. It was really difficult for her direct reports, because if there was a big presentation, for example, for board of directors, her diary would be just wiped out of every single meeting. She would just work on this one priority. It would mean that she's not there for your one-to-one. She's not there to give you direction unless absolutely critical. But she was very clear about, this is my priority and this is what I'm going to do, and you are going to survive. And when I'm back in 2 weeks' time with my full load, you are going to tell me everything you've done in those 2 weeks, and there's no slacking. So there are ways how you can manage basically your calendar differently, but only if you're willing to let go of certain patterns of behaviors and you're extremely honest with what is your priority, and therefore what is the trade-off of choosing that as your priority.
And as part of what we've talked about before this podcast around sustainable productivity and trying to have an amount of longevity to your career that you can actually enjoy, but talk to me a bit more about that.
So I'm still trying to find the right way of saying it. But it's all about putting the effort where you are creating the most impact, but also in a way that it agrees with how you work best. And again, something that was very true for me and for many other high achievers is we see what a successful role model looks like, and we want to be like that mold. And if that means waking up at 5 a.m. because 5 a.m. club, we will do it, even if our own chronotype means something else. So one of the elements is, how do you structure your day? Where are you most alert? When are you most creative? Are you introverted or extroverted? One of the challenges for me was that came Corona, everything became a video conference, and I didn't have the downtime that I need as an introvert to be recovering from all that stimulation, social stimulation. So it's also trying to factor in, what is your optimum? How many hours of meetings can you do? How many can you not? If you want to be at your optimal performance, when should you be even taking breaks? So there are some neuroscience that can inform you about how the brain best works, but there's also a lot of variability on the personal level, on your own preferences, on your own temperament. There's also trying to understand, most of the jobs you can craft to a certain degree. And it's, if you look at your tasks during the week, how many of them are actually energizing you, and how many of them are you're dreading and they are just sucking your energy? How can you spend more time on what you are naturally good at and naturally you feel like this is what you want to be doing, and how to minimize things that are just taking the energy out of you? And again, it requires a lot of self-confidence, feeling you can request those changes. But I'm a great believer that when you do the work properly, you can significantly improve the quality of your life without needing to change the jobs, without needing to go part-time, or having a very significant transitions.
Yeah, that's great. So in terms of practical advice, let's just say there's someone listening to this who's, a senior leader, who's, on paper got it all, great position, lots of money, but it's just struggling and feels like something's not right. What kind of practical advice would you give them?
The very first thing I will say is don't jump for a big change immediately, because it will just create a temporary relief, and it's likely that you will just be on the pendulum. If you think that your job is too stressful, you will go on full mode retirement, only to discover that actually you just needed some changes and slightly less pressure or more seasonality into your work. So don't do drastic changes unless you feel like you're in the mind, your mind is in a position to make the elaborate decisions. I think the exercise that I love to give practically to everybody, and it's one that helped me the most, was to create your lifeline, and you put decades, so 10, 20, 30, 40, whatever. You put a line where you're currently, and for everything that already happened, you just write down as many influential things that happened during that time. It could be influential people that were in your life. It could be what you were doing, good, bad, doesn't really matter, just things that you remember. And going forward, for each decade, write what you would like your life to look like at that moment in time. And if it's blank, it's okay too. But you will start, when you look at that, and you zoom out, you start seeing patterns. I was the most invigorated at that moment in my time, or I was when those elements were present, and you start getting a feel for what is actually important for you. And when you look at in your future, it's like, how much is it clear for you? What do you actually want? And how much of what you are choosing today is supporting the future? I have to say that when I first did this exercise, my future was very blank, and it took me ages to be able to answer the question, what do I want? Not what do I think is best, what do I think would look good, but what do I want? And that's a completely different set of problems. But already doing this first pass gives you a lot of information about what's currently missing at that moment in time in your life. And if you introduce it back, you will immediately feel relief.
Yeah, fantastic. Maybe we should set that as our challenge to listeners, to do the exercise, to go out there and write down what's been coming up over them. I think I like that exercise in terms of looking back, but also looking forward. That's really nice. And I think there's also something in there about what I talk to people around, running. You got this idea of running. You call it the pendulum, but running from something or running towards something. And often people are jumping out of the fire. It's stressful. I just need to get out, get out, get out. And I hear what you're saying there, which is, well, maybe take a step back and see if there's a halfway house to start with. For some people, it might be right to just dump out. But for other people, there might be a way of recalibrating things so that things are a bit easier in the short term, and you can, make some changes that make things feel better. Okay, well, we're coming to the end of the podcast, but was there anything else you wanted to share with our listeners?
There's one thing that I recently heard, and I thought that had I known that earlier, it would have simplified a lot of the thought processes I had. And that was around your calling, call it meaning, purpose, whatever. And that the calling is not what you do, but how you do. And I thought, oh my God, this is beautiful, because there's so much pressure in finding yourself, in finding the what you are, good at naturally comes to you. People want to pay for you all the ikigai, but the what is actually very challenging to find. And there's also this massive disappointment if what it's not quite fitting what your expectations were. But if you think about it more like it's how you want to be doing it, what are the set of principles that guide you, the values, suddenly there's just so many more opportunities for things to work in that space because the what becomes secondary. And I really wish I heard that definition earlier.
Yeah, it's lovely that different perspective on that. And yeah, there's a lot of focus on the why. And I think a lot of people, and certainly when I've been coaching, that's one of the main obstacles that comes up, right? Especially in professional services. It's like, I am a lawyer, I'm good at this. That's all I'm good at, and actually it's like, well, no, obviously not. When you take a step back, there's so much more, and you can figure, and like you said there, if you can figure out what's important to you about how you do the job, then that opens up probably a lot more opportunities. And also, you're right in terms of that ikigai, it takes the pressure off all of that, doesn't it? By thinking that slightly different perspective. I like that a lot. Okay, well, thanks very much for being on the podcast. I think we could have probably talked for about 3 hours, especially on some of those themes, but we don't have 3 hours today. I think you've got to get back to your real life. But thanks very much for being on a podcast.
Thanks, Nat. It was lovely to be here.